Welcome to Advanced Learning Made Easy. I am your host, Clint Rodriguez. This video is just going to serve as a short introduction to some of the strategies and the resources that you're going to be utilizing as you work your way through this course, which is all about planning rigorous content for gifted and talented and other advanced learners. The first question that we're going to ask ourselves before we even get started is, who are the gifted and talented? Who are these kids that we are trying to serve with more rigorous and more challenging curriculum? If you're in Texas, you may be familiar with the Texas state definition of the gifted and talented. I think it's pretty handy. Texas says that a gifted kid is any kid or youth who performs at or shows the potential for performing at a remarkably high level of accomplishment when compared to others of the same age, experience, or environment. So one of the things that I really want to stress as you're working through the course is that all of the material, all of the strategies, all of the resources that I've curated for you, it's not so much that they are exclusively for the gifted, okay? It doesn't mean that you only use this stuff with kids who have a little G by their name in whatever your learning management system is. Any kid who shows the potential, any kid who wants, any kid who is in need of more challenging learning, this stuff is for them. Okay, so don't feel like you have to withhold it from your quote unquote non-gifted kids. It really is for any kid who's ready for more advanced stuff and more sophisticated thinking. So as you're working through the course, be thinking about those kids. Which of your kids is gifted identified? Which of your kids do you suspect might be gifted but doesn't have that little G next to their name? Which are the kids that you just think are ready to move on, or which are the kids that are just ready for more challenge? Okay, this stuff is for them. And then be thinking, as you're kind of selecting a topic to work with, do you know what their areas of strength are? Do you know what their weaknesses are? What kinds of stuff do they like doing? What kinds of stuff do they not like doing? We really want to tailor our instruction as much as possible to those wants and needs. Okay, so we know who the gifted and talented are now. Now let's ask ourselves, okay, well, so what? Okay, we've identified them as gifted, or we suspect that they may be gifted, or we know that they're just advanced academically. What are we supposed to do about that? Well, Texas also has a handy dandy goal for gifted and talented students, and we're only going to focus in this course really on the first part of this. We are focusing on designing stuff for gifted and talented students so that they can demonstrate and develop skills in self-directed learning, thinking, research, and communication as evidenced by the development of innovative products and performances. Okay? Again, we're not going to focus too much on the rest of this, really not even so much on the products and performances. We're really, during this course, just talking about self-directed learning, thinking, research, and communication, all right? Those advanced products will come later. What we're focusing on here is really the skill building. Well, how are we going to do that? One of the things that I always emphasize is the how for gifted, and really kind of what I think should be the how for everybody else, is that you plan, you design lessons and learning experiences starting from the top. Okay, what do you believe that your most advanced kids can do? What do you think is going to challenge your most advanced kids? All right, and so that's what you plan for. Okay, what I've done here is basically invert the RTI diamond so that we put gifted on top, and we spend a lot of time thinking about those gifted kids and what we think they can do, and then we design that kind of activity. Okay, and then we scaffold it so that kids who are not gifted, kids who don't fall in that range, whether they're advanced on level, whether they're just a little bit behind, or whether they're really struggling, we take that gifted experience and we scaffold it down, whether it's through pacing and other supports, so that all kids get rigorous and advanced learning. All right, not everybody's going to get it the first time, but all of this stuff that we're going to be talking about, I truly do believe that with the right structure and the right support, all kids, regardless of whether or not they are gifted, could benefit from these strategies. The big secret in gifted education is that gifted education is really just good education a lot of the time. GT curriculum and instruction should focus on 4 things, in my opinion. The first one is acceleration. Let kids go faster when they're ready to go faster. We're not going to talk about acceleration in this course, but I do want you to kind of have it in the back of your mind. We're going to focus really more on the 2, 3, and 4 there. So depth, breadth, and complexity. Well, what do those things really mean? These are great things to think about. You really We all want to think that our curriculum is deep. We all want to think that our curriculum is broad. We all want to think that it's complex. But what does it mean to practically embed these things in your everyday teaching and learning? That's what all these strategies are about. They're big abstract words, they're big concepts, but the way that you incorporate them into teaching and learning doesn't have to be a whole dog and pony show. Really, all we're going to be focusing on throughout this course is just how to write really good questions and strategies for writing really good questions. So before we move on, I want to make sure that everybody is aware of the resource folder. Everything that I'm going to be referencing in this video and everything that's in the course is in this resource folder, so make sure that you have that written down. It's also linked in the Google Classroom, but I just want to call your attention to it now to make sure that everybody's on the same page. The first thing that we're going to be focusing on in the course is something called a thinking triangle, and we're pairing it with leveled questions. So the thinking triangle, this is a concept I've borrowed from Bertie Kingor, and the leveled questionings were developed by James Gallagher and Mary Jane Asher. So it's a triangle. The triangle is not really the most important thing. Just because it's at the bottom of the triangle doesn't mean that it's bad thinking. Just because it's at the top of the triangle doesn't mean that it's like the most important thing ever. These are different thinking skills, and they're all very important. We're going to start with memory, okay? What are the facts and figures and dates and things like that that kids need to know, okay? What's the kind of stuff that's going to show up on a standardized test, okay? Memory is important. I don't want to skip memory. Kids cannot be creative and they cannot think critically about facts and figures and skills they don't have. Okay, so we don't want to skip memory because ultimately it's just really good to know a lot of stuff. A lot of folks will say, well, if you can Google it, it's not a very good question. That's true to some extent, but I also kind of say, well, think about all the time you save not having to Google if you just know stuff. Okay, so the memory level, if you're thinking about it from a questioning standpoint, is going to be a who, what, when, or where, if you're thinking about kind of those reporter questions that maybe you learned in elementary school. So that's just memory, facts, figures, the basic stuff. Okay, then we move up the pyramid to a slightly higher level of thinking for the convergent kind of thought. Okay, so convergent is written about the level of analysis. It's where most of the texts are written. And this is going to be asking why or how. So convergent takes all those facts and figures that you have from memory and it tries to put them together to reach a correct answer. Okay, so those are the first two levels. Then, once we've got a good basis in those basic skills, and again, basic does not mean bad, basic is still important. Okay, once we have a good basis in memory and convergent, then we can move up into the evaluative. Okay, so are things good or bad? What's the best or the worst? Asking kids to rank things and stuff like that. Okay, again, it's just a different level of thinking. Okay, it's not necessarily more important than convergent or memory, but it's just a different kind of thinking. Okay, then from evaluative, we can move up into the divergent and the speculative kind of thinking. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. That's where you're asking kids, well, what if? Okay, take something away, change something around. What happens when you change the conditions of something? That kind of thing. One of the things to keep in mind here, again, memory and conversion are so important. Okay, gifted kids can do magic tricks, but they need a rabbit and a hat. Okay, so convergent and memory, that's the rabbit and the hat. Evaluative and divergent, speculative, that's the magic trick. Okay, so don't skip those bottom two parts of the triangle. One way to think about it is if you're an English teacher, I'm sure that every English teacher out there has had an experience where they were talking to a kid and they asked the kid, well, why do you think the character did that? Or what do you think happens next? And that kid will give you just the most beautiful, elaborate answer that has no basis in the text, okay? That's what happens when we skip to evaluative and divergent without making sure that we have memory and convergent pretty solid. One thing you can say about gifted kids is that you might even kind of flip the triangle and you'd spend a lot less time on convergent and memory because they might just get things faster, but that doesn't mean you can skip them. Okay, so what does this look like in practice? Well, from a memory standpoint, a good memory question would be something like, in 1492, who sailed the ocean blue? It's not a trick question. Of course, it was Columbus who sailed the ocean blue. Everybody has probably heard that rhyme, right? So that's just a basic fact. Well, okay, so now you're thinking, well, basic facts, how do we put some of the things that we know about Columbus into practice so that we can then land on a convergent question. Well, an example of a convergent question would be, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Well, why did he do that? And probably a lot of us learned, well, it was because of gold, glory, and God. And you could even bump up the level of thinking a little bit with this kind of convergent question by saying, well, of gold, glory, and God, those three, which was the most important? Just to kind of, again, bump up the level of thinking. So that's a convergent question, asking kids to put facts together to come to a right answer. Then we move on to the evaluative kind of question where it starts to get fun. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Was that a good thing? Okay, was it good or bad? A lot of times you'll just land on the, well, it depends on who you ask. Obviously, it worked out really well for Europe. It didn't work out so well for pretty much everybody in the Western Hemisphere. Now is a good time to kind of caution you about the examples I'm using. I'm using this example with adults because I think that we can handle it. I would kind of tread pretty lightly if you're thinking about using this example with your kids. You don't want to get kids into a position where you're re-traumatizing them depending on their background, and you certainly don't want kids playing devil's advocate about kind of the things that resulted from Columbus's voyage. So from evaluative, then we get into speculative. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Well, what if he hadn't? What would be different? What would the civilizations and the societies in the Western Hemisphere have looked like if they'd continued to develop without European interference? You could add some nuance to a question like this and say, well, what if he had, but maybe his motives had been a little bit better? Maybe he'd been a nicer guy. What if it hadn't been Columbus? What if it had been somebody else who landed first? What if Columbus had gone later? What if Columbus had gone earlier? Okay, so you're just moving kids up and down the triangle with different skill sets. Okay, so that's a thinking triangle, and that's one of the things that you're going to be making in this course. The next thing that we're going to move into are the depth and complexity icons. So if you've been around gifted education at all, you've probably seen these before. Over here, the more colorful ones, you've got the lips are language of the discipline, the flower details, this little Z thing here is going to be patterns, basically an org chart is rules, trends, unanswered questions. My favorite icon, ethics, big idea, this Parthenon looking thing, this sort of recycle looking thing, change over time. Multiple perspectives, another one of my favorite icons, and then across the disciplines. Then we get over into the more moody content imperatives. You've got origins, contributions, convergence, parallel, and then also I really like paradox. That's one of my favorites. So these are just, again, they're not curriculum, they're not content, but they're ways of approaching content. Okay, so these are all thinking skills that you would want to develop with your kids. Okay. The main resource you're going to be working with in the course is this one-pager that I created. And what it's going to ask you to do is going to ask you to think about all the icons, think about your topic, and then write a higher level question about your topic using the icon as your lens. Okay, so the one-pager, there's a clean copy here. I labeled everything COVID just for my own purposes, I guess. So that's going to be the one-pager. If you were really wanting to explore depth and complexity more in depth, lots of other great resources out there. Jay Taylor Education, of course, has beautiful products for purchase that I think are absolutely worth all the money that they are asking for them. Posters, question cards, things like that. It's really your one-stop shop for all of that. Your friend and mine, Lisa Van Gimmert, has lots and lots of great resources on her website as well, including some editable frames. Envision Gifted has done some really intriguing work combining icons. So for example, let's look at ethics, but let's look at the multiple perspectives of ethics. And then finally, Ian Bird at Birdseed also has a lot of really great stuff on his website. So what you're going to be doing in this portion is basically, again, just thinking about your topic, thinking about an icon, and then using that icon to ask a higher level question about your topic. The next activity you're going to be doing, though, is something called a depth and complexity frame, which you could use as a pre-test or a post-test. Essentially what you do is you put any topic, any subject, any material here in the middle, then you pick icons, and then you use those icons again to ask a higher level question about whatever it is that you are discussing with your students. So for this one, I just chose a really general topic, conflict. That shows up in social and emotional learning. That shows up in history. That shows up, of course, when you're talking about plot and all of that stuff. You could even, thinking about it from AP Human Geo, ethnic conflict, getting more specific. So again, I chose my icons and then I asked a higher level question based on that icon. And what you do is you essentially just kind of make this an assignment for your kids. Say, hey, here's this icon. In this frame, fill out everything that you can tell me about the origins of conflict. Or you might even just say, hey, kids, pick your own icons and populate the frame, and then just do a brain dump. And you can use that as a pre-assessment. You can use it as a post-assessment. There's all kinds of different frames that you can look at. Just do a Google image search, and people will come up with lots of different configurations. So you're going to be making a frame. How you use it in your classroom is up to you, but it's a very simple but also very powerful way of figuring out what kids know or even what they want to know. So that's depth and complexity frames. Now we're going to move into the 4 parallels. And these are based on the work of Carol Ann Tomlinson and a whole bunch of other great minds in GT education. So you can purchase this book, and I really do recommend purchasing it. It changed my teaching. It transformed my teaching. So as you are thinking about curriculum, as you are thinking about what kids are supposed to know and be able to do, really, you want to be asking 5 questions. And I've written these from the perspective of the student because we want them to have ownership of their learning. So as I'm approaching a topic, the first question I want to ask is, okay, well, what do I know? And you might change that to, well, what am I supposed to know? Okay, what is the state of Texas or whatever state I'm in? What do they say that I'm supposed to know and be able to do? And then on top of that, well, what do I want to know? And from there, then you say, okay, well, how do I know that I know it? Or how will I know when I know it? So we're pretty good at 1 and 2, okay? We're good at figuring out what kids are supposed to know, and we're good at kind of assessing for that, okay? That's what most curriculum instruction is all about. But then 3 makes it a little bit more interesting because now kids are asking, well, what do others know? Okay, what do people in my community know? What are some experts I could ask? What are some resources I could consult to figure out the answers to the questions that I have? Then we get to question number 4, which is a really important application question, okay? What can I do with what I know? Okay, so you told me I was supposed to know this stuff. Well, so what? Okay, when am I going to use this stuff? And kids always, always, always have that question. We want to make sure that we have an intriguing answer and a meaningful answer. And then 5, I think, is really the most important question, is what should I do with what I know? Okay, so if I answered question number 4, well, I know all this math and geometry and physics and stuff like that. Well, what can I do with that? Well, I can be an engineer. Well, then 5 is, well, what should I do with what I know? What's the moral thing to do? What's the right thing to do? And what I kind of always pose this as is kind of saying, well, there's lots of different kinds of engineers. Some engineers build bridges, some engineers build bombs, okay? So really asking, okay, so what's the moral weight of this content? And also thinking about, all teaching and learning is about moving kids along this line from beginner to novice, to practitioner, to expert, to eminent. So a beginner, what can kids not do? What do they not know how to do? What do they need to be taught? Okay. Novice is kind of, okay, well, what can they do with help? Practitioner is what can they do without help? Expert is what they could theoretically teach others to do. And again, we do not want gifted kids playing helper teacher. They're not your assistant teacher. But the idea just being, do they know enough about a topic, or are they good enough at a certain skill that somebody else could learn from them? And then hopefully, by the end of their, career, they've moved into some kind of eminence where they're not just an expert, but they're an expert to other experts. They're the kind of expert that other experts look to. So it's all about moving them through their educational career from beginner to novice to practitioner to expert to hopefully at some point that eminence. So there's 5 questions, but there are only 4 parallels. There's core, there's connections, there's practice, and there's identity. Core is just the basics. What do students need to know, and what's going to be on the test? Okay. Core is your texts, it's your standards, it's what you have to teach, okay? I also added a row down here thinking about the 4 parallels from project-based learning. So if you're thinking about it from a project or a problem kind of basis, what must I know and be able to do to solve my problem or to complete my project? So those are your basics. That is kind of going back to the memory level of the triangle. Then we move over to connections. This is asking kids, okay, how does this content connect to other disciplines? How does it connect to the real world? Maybe you're thinking about how it connects across time periods or regions, things of that nature. From a problem-based learning perspective, how does this problem relate to other problems? Then we move over to practice. Again, okay, like what am I going to do with this stuff? So is this content and skill that I'm going to use every single day or every single week or maybe just once a year, when I'm doing my taxes or whatever? Or is it a question of, well, I may not use it every day, but maybe I'm interested in a profession that will use it every day. So how is this content used by professionals? What do professionals in a field do and not do? Are there codes of conduct? Are there certain things that, for example, scientists don't do because it's politically frowned upon? Then down there for the problem-based learning perspective, how would an expert approach this problem? And then we get over to my favorite of the parallels, which is identity, which is really, again, asking kids, what should I do with what I know? How does this content impact me in my community? What are the moral and ethical ramifications of this content? If it doesn't impact me in my community, if it doesn't shape my identity, if it doesn't change how I think about myself, maybe it impacts somebody else. Maybe it impacts other communities that I'm not a part of. What should I do about that? Should I care? Okay. And then down there, problem-based learning. How will solving this problem impact me in the world? Hopefully for the better. Okay. So again, it's all about questioning. This is what it looks like in practice. Okay. So what I've done is I've taken a 6th grade ELAR TEK, everybody's favorite TEK in 6th grade ELAR, talking about mythology. And then I've basically asked questions related to each of the other 3 parallels. Now, as you're planning, I'm going to ask in the course that you fill out all 3 parallels, but really what you would do in a unit is you would plan for the core because you have to, that's required, but then you would really try to develop maybe just 1 or 2 of these. So for this unit, I really just want kids to be thinking about identity, okay? But maybe for the next TEK, I really want them thinking about practice. Okay, so that's what it looks like in ELAR. You can pause the video to kind of read over that a little bit more thoroughly. Here's what it looks like in social studies. Again, you're using the parallels to drive higher level questioning. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can read them on your own. And there's plenty of other examples in the resource folder for questioning. So do take a look at that. Here they are for science. Everybody loves the space TEK. So again, there's more examples of those. And then finally, math. Math can be a little bit more difficult, I'm not going to lie about that, but where you will get a lot of bang for your buck if you're planning with the parallels for math is really thinking about some of those skills TEKs and those process TEKs. I realize now that I've said both TEKs and TEKs, I prefer the TEKs pronunciation. Just a fun fact about me, I think it's pronounced TEKs. So this is what it would look like for math, for planning with the parallels. Again, lots of different resources in the folder, and this is kind of going to be your culminating piece in the course. The resource folder has all different kinds of things. If you're more into project-based learning, I've got some inquiry pieces here. There's a big higher level questioning, kind of question stem bank that you might want to take a look at. And then you can also, in there, you'll see this right here, which aligns pretty much everything that we talked about in this video and that we're going to be talking about in the course. So all of this stuff kind of bleeds together in a way that can be really powerful. So be sure to be looking in the resource folder for all of this stuff. That is the end of the video. Thank you so much for playing along, and thank you so much for being in the course. If you have any kind of general questions related to gifted education, you can always reach me at clintonTrodriguez@gmail.com. If you are a Twitter person, I would love it if you would follow me at CTRodGT. I have a pretty fun Twitter account. And if you want to shoot some traffic to my website, there's more resources there as well. That is ctrodgt.com. Thank you so much.